Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. One that I honestly thought I was never going to do. Painting quartered marines, it's not the quickest way of painting a Space Marine army, but they do look striking on the table. And I think, despite the extra work it takes to do them, if you want a really impressive looking force, this is one way of getting it done. Now luckily, the steps involved are not too difficult. Mostly it's about picking your primer colors, so I'll get to that in a little bit. But hopefully you'll find something here interesting, no matter which marines you're painting. I've chosen the Howling Griffons here because they look so cool. Yellow and red, how can you go wrong? And all of the paints will be listed in the description below. So, without any further mucking around, let's get started. Now to begin with, I've primed our fellow with a spray of Skeleton Bone from the Army Painter. You could use Wraith Bone if that's what you've got, but I like Skeleton Bone. It's a little bit deeper, it's got a little bit more warmth to it. It is ever so slightly darker, but that's going to work quite well for what I've got in mind. Now, from here, you could grab yourself some Flash Gets Yellow. This is real bright. Or, if you've got access to Skeleton Bone, it stands to reason that you've got access to the rest of the Army Painter's sprays. So I'm actually going to use their Demonic Yellow spray. You can hear that rattling away in the side there. And I'm going to give him a second spray. Now you might ask, why not just start from Demonic Yellow? It's quite a thin colour, really, so it works best if you put a light primer underneath, in this case, our Skeleton Bone. So let's go ahead and spray him with that, rather than painstakingly painting on the Flash Gets Yellow. Now for just a few seconds worth of work, this is what you've got. And Demonic Yellow, like I said, over Skeleton Bone is going to give you quite a nice yellow. It's very similar to Flash Gets Yellow, but just a little less orange. Like on a palette, you will struggle to see the difference. But I would recommend pick yourself up some Demonic Yellow in the pot too, because we're probably going to need to do some tidy up a little bit later on. And you want to match that colour as closely as you can. But for now, let's get on to the red. Now, some parts of the Marine that are going to be red, you're going to find it very easy to reach, like his shoulder pad, for example. Now I'm using Evil Sunz Scarlet with just a little bit of water in so that it flows easily. What I'm going to do now is start painting as carefully as I can a line down the middle of those yellow sections. I'm not worried about covering the rest of the marine just yet. What I want is to do the line. Now, here's a little trick. I find, because I'm right-handed, if I make a mistake, my brush tends to pull in the direction of my hand, which I'm holding. So I'm going to paint, always trying to keep the red side to the right, because, like I said, if I make a mistake, my brush is more likely to go that way than the other. Now I will deliberately make a little blop there, so I can show you how to fix that later. But what I'm going to do now, unfortunately, there is not a fast way of doing this. We're going to paint that central line on. Oops, I'm going to knock my paint over, goodness. Oh, calm yourselves, guys. I'm going to paint that central line on. And you're better to err on the side of caution and not come right up to the center straight away. Just build the line until you're satisfied that it's in the middle. This can be difficult to get straight, so don't worry if it's not 100% perfect. But, yeah. Oh yeah, quartered. I need to remember which side is which color. So let's put down this dividing line first, and I'll show you what I mean when that's finished. Now, it doesn't look like much at the moment, but the purpose of that is really just to lay down the line and get an idea of where the center is going to be. So let's flip them around, and I've got here some Skeleton Bone. I want to go back to my primer color. So if you've used Wraith Bone, then of course you would pick up your Wraith Bone pot. And what I'm going to do is go over, let's just get that in shot, those areas where I have made a mistake, because you'll find it way easier to cover over the primer color with Demonic Yellow than trying to do 4 or 5 coats of Demonic Yellow to get a solid color. So the same too on the top of his pack here, you'll see I've got that little bit needs to be straightened up. And you can do this all around the armor. So on his butt plate here, where I painted completely the wrong side, because I'd forgotten I was holding him upside down. Yeah, photo reference is really useful, guys. Now you can see a few of those little skeleton bone spots that we're going to tidy up later. I'm actually going to go to the red now, rather than touching those up with yellow, because if we make any more mistakes during this application stage, it'll be easy for us to swap back to the skeleton bone and do the yellow as a final stage. So, with a small, something equivalent to a small base brush, let's just apply. Ooh, boy, that's bright. Pop your red Evil Sunz Scarlet over the opposite sides of your marine. Now this will cover fairly well, but you'll see that you will get some streaking of the very bright primer showing underneath. So what we'll do when we're finished with this first coat is to let it dry thoroughly. Give it about 10 minutes and then come back and put another coat over the top. So after 2 coats, and honestly 3 coats on the shoulder pad here to make sure I have a nice solid colour, there is the quartering finished. Now there are a few little spots where I knew I was going to go awry, so I'm going to go back to my skeleton bone just now and tidy those up. But a quick thing I wanted to point out, remember that your helmet quartering is going to move if the helmet moves. You know, he's not just going to be a straight line, you're going to get this weird sort of cross, which looks kind of funny when you're trying to keep it all in perspective. But I'm going to tidy up with the skeleton bone now, and then I'll finish off the tidying with that demonic yellow, and I'll show you that. Now I tend to find as well that demonic yellow has a slightly easier consistency to work with than Flash Gets Yellow does. You will still want a little bit of water in there to make sure it flows, but you'll see just how quickly that covers over our skeleton bone. So saving ourselves 3 or 4 coats of that with just 1 coat of the skeleton bone first really helps speed up cleanup. So let's finish off that now. Now it's the nature of anything being painted by hand that these lines aren't going to be perfectly straight. And unfortunately masking these with tape is pretty difficult. So it's honestly one of those things that's just going to take some practice and knowing where to clean up. Besides which, if anybody picks up your painted Howling Griffon and turns them upside down and goes, "Oh, the line between his pack and his shoulders isn't quite straight," you are legally permitted to bite that person as hard as you can. You're not, but you should be able to. Anyway, moving on. One of the neat things about the Howling Griffons is that once you've gotten past the armor itself, the rest of them is a fairly simple color scheme. So I've got Leadbelcher, and we're now going to do all of the metal details. Now, there are quite a few of these, so take your time. And if you're going to hit anywhere that is going to be black later, don't worry too much. Just when you come near the armor, of course, slow down. You want to try and save yourself any last bits of cleanup if you can. So chest eagle 2, weapons, and any other little bits that you want to be silver. Now doing the metalwork on these guys does feel a little bit like, now paint the rest of the Space Marine, because he starts to look a lot better. What I'm going to do now, I've actually got here VALLEJO black. The reason for this is that its coverage is slightly better than Abaddon black, and anywhere that we can avoid having to go back over an area, we cut down on the amount of brush strokes, which means we cut down the amount of potential mistakes we can make. So I'm going to paint in all of the black details. So it's weapon casings, and if you want to, there's a bit of a decision to be made here. You can paint in the equipment in black as well. I'm going to use a color called German Grey. It is another VALLEJO one, and it's just off black. You might use Corvus black instead if you wanted to do this using Citadel colors. But I tend to like it for a leather touch, because when you shade it, you do get a little bit of extra sort of depth to it once it's got some black shading on. But whatever the case, let's fill in all these black areas. And like I said, I'm going to use German Grey at the same time for his equipment. Now up close, you can see the difference between that German Grey I mentioned and a straight black, but you can probably see as well, if you just want to stick to black because it's simpler, that will work perfectly well. What I'm going to do now is move on and finish off just the last couple of details, if I can find where I put my skeleton bone on my palette. And because I've got it, this is what I'm going to use to paint the purity seals. So let's just fill these in, give these a couple of coats, And when it comes to the, what's the word, the wax at the top, I'm just going to pick a green. I'm going to use Waaagh Flesh for that. Now once the purity seals are done, really the last detail to add will be his eyes, but we're going to do that nearly as a final stage. What I'm going to do now is actually hit him with a gloss varnish. And I mention this now because we really need this to set before we move on to the next step. If you don't let this set and cure properly, it's going to start lifting off when we apply the shade, and things are going to go disastrously wrong. So you want to leave this for at least half an hour once we've varnished it. The longer the better. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it for a full hour once that's varnished. Then we'll come back and get a look at what that looks like. So with the magic of television, an hour has magically passed. Now that is real shiny, but that's the purpose of the gloss varnish. Why we're using this is that this reduces surface tension for any shades that we apply over the top. So ordinarily when we'd apply a shade, it would run into the recesses and leave a little bit on some of these higher points. What we want in this case is for it to just only go to the recesses. We don't want this to sort of seep into and stain the higher points of the miniature. Now the shade that we're going to use is actually a mix that the Forge World team used for their army painting. Now this is equal parts Nuln Oil, Reikland Flesh Shade, and some Lahmian Medium, just to give it a little bit of, a slightly thinner effect. This was revealed by Mark Bedford during one of the Horus Heresy weekenders. So I've always known it as Mark's Marine Juice, which, if you don't hear me giggling when I get to say that, you know I've been replaced by something. But what we're going to do is, same as any other shade, just apply this fairly generously over the whole miniature. And because the medium is going to thin that out quite a bit, you will want to apply maybe slightly more than you would think, but anywhere that you get these big blotches where it collects on flat areas, just move it away while that shade is wet. So take your time, and we are going to fill in the entire miniature with Mark's Marine Juice. Now after about half an hour's worth of drying time, this is what you'll have, and he'll suddenly look like a serious Space Marine rather than a candy-coated Iron Man. What I'm going to do now is, I think, once you've sort of committed to painting quartered Marines, let's go all the way. So I've got here some Ushabti Bone, and I'm using the Air variant here. If you can't find it or you haven't got access to it, normal Ushabti Bone with just a little bit of thinner in there will do the job. But with my small layer brush, what I'm going to do is pick out just a few areas where I want a nice sharp edge. Now parts where this joins with the red are normally a good point to do this. So on his belt sort of section here, I'll make sure that there is a nice sharp line there. And when it comes to areas like on the edge of his shoulder pads, what you can do is get some paint on your brush and sort of drag the edge along to get that line there. Now anywhere that you go overboard, you can go back to your yellow color. So I use demonic yellow, of course, and you can basically fix these highlights if you make any mistakes. There's no stage that you can't come back from if you make a mistake. So you can highlight as much or as little as you like. I would say take your time and, you've committed to Howling Griffons, so enjoy painting them. Now some of those won't stand out immediately on camera because you don't have to go overboard with them. I'd suggest you want to go for areas that are most likely to catch, a viewer's eye. So the top of his helmet, backpack, whereas if I spin him around, you'll see on the back of his leg here, I've actually been quite lazy and only really done the back of his leg. I haven't mucked around with all of this stuff here. What I'm going to do now is exactly the same thing on the red. I'm going to use Troll Slayer Orange. Same caveat, you don't need to use the air stuff. I just find this a little easier to highlight with. Now if you want a sharper highlight, you might choose to use something like Fire Dragon Bright, which will be even brighter, but I think this works pretty well. Doesn't sort of oversaturate the red that we've used, and that looks quite nice. I've got now Stormhost Silver, and I'm going to do the same to the metal, and I'm going to sort of skip through the next couple of highlights too. So first of all, Stormhost Silver, a little bit of that on the metallic stuff. A little bit of Dawnstone on the black areas. I'm going to use Stormvermin Fur on the leather, and this will work whether you used an off black or a pure black to help differentiate between the leather and the metallic stuff. And then a nice bright green to highlight the wax on the purity seals. I'm using here Warboss Green, but anything sort of complementary to what you have used will do the job just fine. Now the fact this guy is holding his chainsaw across his face actually makes it quite difficult to demonstrate what I've got in mind here. But a little bit of white scar, and what I'm going to do is paint in his eyes in a solid white. So let's get in here very carefully. If I can show you and do it at the same time, all the better. Right, the other one I'm going to do off screen. Now I actually found it was easier to hold him upside down in order to reach one of those eyes, so experiment with which direction you're attacking your paint job from. What I've got now, I have contrast color. This is Warp Lightning. And any sort of relevant color to what you want your eyes to be. Here we go. Whispering because I am paying attention. Just dab in a little bit of this into the eye socket. Now once those eyes are dry, all that remains is to give them a matte varnish. Now if you were going to apply any decals, I don't know where to find them, you'll have to Google that yourselves, but apply that now before you put your final matte varnish on, because it'll seal them down, keep them nice and safe. Then what I'll do is give him a quick base, finish him off, and we'll get a look at what he looks like when he's all finished. And there we have it, our Howling Griffon is at last complete. Now like I mentioned, you could go for brighter highlights if you wanted to. It's really a matter of personal choice. Honestly, the same principles apply whether you're painting Nova Marines or Sons of the Phoenix, any sort of quartered or unusually painted Space Marines, even Brazen Claws for your Iron Hands fans. Trying to start so that you paint the lighter color first and then put the darker color over the top of that is going to make things a lot easier, rather than trying to paint a light color over a darker undercoat. Simple sort of layering techniques like that are going to save you a lot of time. Now this isn't the fastest method out there, but I think this is one where you're going to get a fairly decent result for the amount of time that goes in. Once you've gone ahead and chosen a quartered Marine army, I think you're in it for the long haul, so it doesn't hurt too much to know that it's going to be a little more time consuming than just dry brushing something blue, but I think the end results are worth it. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including producers Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Connor, Trainboy, and Fred. Your support is invaluable. So any comments or questions, feel free to drop them in the old box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.